Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 71.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and I'm without guest today, either Dr. Mike, Dr. Cratio, or any other guest. I'm talking about an area that really is near and dear to my heart, something that shouldn't be too difficult to share some experiences and stories about, and it's something I know that you're struggling with. And I know that because I've struggled with it, and I know that not only have I struggled with it, and it's gotten easier, and it's something that we've been able to work through, create systems around, our communication strategies around. Of course, it happens a lot less, but it still happens, and that's people leaving your practice. So think about the pain that comes along with this. And you can tell yourself, I'm fine, it doesn't affect me, and maybe that's the case, but I would say that it's a very rare situation where I speak with someone, a client, a future client, or someone just who listens to the show, or someone who contacts me. This is an area that many, if not every single chiropractor on some level still continues to struggle with. So think about the mix of emotions that happen when someone sends you that email, or maybe it's a phone call. I know for us, if it ever happens, or there's a situation where it might happen, it typically comes as a reply to a scheduled appointment. So our email reminders go out and they reply to those. And I know when my staff sends me a reply to a scheduled appointment, I see the forward in my inbox. I know that there's something that I'm going to have to deal with. Somebody's either dropping out of their care or there's some other fire that needs to be put out. So there's always that emotional pain that comes along with that. And I will say earlier on in practice, it was much more painful. You go through that series of steps and that series of feelings of, oh man, I gave everything to this person. How dare they? I need that $50. What is this person thinking? How crazy can they be to drop out of chiropractic care? How do they not know that chiropractic is so good for them? Who's going to check them for subluxations? What do I do? There's another person leaving my practice. Did I do something wrong? Are my systems wrong? Is there a problem with my communication strategy? And really, it's those types of emotions and feelings that we go through that set us up on that cycle where we're constantly chasing that shiny penny. And we're looking for the next system. We're looking for the next coaching program. We're looking for the newest marketing tactic that we can use. And a lot of this is driven because the reality is that at some point, people are going to leave your practice. And that's just the way that it is. And that's the same for any single business. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you, and I'm not even saying reconcile with that. I'm not saying accept that in the sense that making it okay, hey, no big deal, somebody left practice, somebody left care. I don't think that's a great strategy to use. And we'll talk a bit about near the end what I think is a great strategy to use and some tactics and tips that you can use to start to develop your own mindset around this. But, the fact of the matter is people are going to leave. And I know when I started my practice many years ago, at this point in 2003, and I opened my first practice and it was on a really high traffic area. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. Now I had no coaching, no real mentorship, but I was passionate about chiropractic. I was passionate about subluxation. I'd, listened to every single Reggie Gold tape I could get, been exposed to lots of different people who would be speaking or read lots of different books. And I thought, oh, I've got this all figured out, even to the point where I remember when I covered the windows in the brown papers, you're doing renovations, and I'm there working hard every day. And on the front, I had written, big things coming, life changing, all this type of language to get people excited. Of course, now looking back, I have a little chuckle about, my marketing abilities 15 years ago and how terrible they were. But the reality is I actually thought, and I believe this 1,000%, I fully believed it, that when I opened my practice, that I was so passionate, I felt so confident in what I did, and I'm confident in even the care I delivered, that nobody would ever leave my practice because I was completely sold by the logic of chiropractic, the fact that you were better off not subluxated. It just made so much sense to me. And I felt like because it made that much sense to me and I had developed a strong ability to communicate that message, even early in practice, even before I started practice, that I'd communicate it to people, the light would go off and they would stay with me forever. And so you can only imagine the pain that I had to deal with as within weeks of starting my practice, new patients weren't starting. New patients weren't keeping appointments. New patients were leaving at some point, even people who I'd developed relationships with. And you think, wow, this person really gets it. And maybe they did get it. There was other reasons why they may have left care. And then they would leave and the pain that would go on with that. And of course, early on in practice, still struggling with finances and being heavily in debt. Now I like to remind myself, I don't need your $50, right? That's a mantra that plays inside my head as a reminder. I don't need this person's $50. What I need is for them to make a commitment to this process so they have an amazing result. And of course, I'll reap the benefit of they'll be making a financial exchange for that, but they're also going to be creating a great reputation for our business and practice in the community. So I need an agreement and I need that commitment. I don't need the $50. And the sooner you can get to that place, the better you're going to be able to manage the effects and the emotions that come along with this. So, I think back again, and those first few years were painful, and it was an incredible struggle. And I'm sure lots of you listening still go through this. And even today, I was looking through the success surveillance system, and we have so few inactives, which is wonderful. And I think a part of that is because of the pain that I went through in order to be better at communication, create better agreements, create better systems. Maybe part of it was coming from a negative aspect, right? That fear of losing people, which was already a fear for me personally, having lost people in my life and having had that have a very dramatic effect on me emotionally. I think I had already had that fear. And so it really played on my own self-esteem and it played on my own pain points. And, of course, the upside of that is it's led to lots of development of systems and an organizational structure that keeps our inactives at a minimum. But we still have a process to go through that. And still to this day, it's still not as if it happens and I'm okay with it. And I'm suggesting that as much as you want to have a system in place, a mindset in place to manage all this, I'm actually saying don't become okay with it. Never get to the point where it's, oh, ho-hum, no big deal, somebody left my practice. I would actually prefer still to see you on the opposite side of that, where there's not necessarily anger, but there's, man, what could I have done better? Was there a way I could have communicated better to this person? So number one, just recognize that people are going to leave your practice, and we don't want that. We don't want to ever be okay with that in the sense that it's not a big deal, but it's still going to happen. Number two, it's usually not about you. Doesn't mean it's not. It means it's usually not. So it's still worth looking into yourself. It's still worth asking the question, was there something I could have done better? Was there a system that I could have implemented? Was my communication, was it solid? Did I skip past certain steps? Typically, that's what I find when it comes back to you in some of these cases, in the rare cases that it was just something that you did or you said or you didn't say. And that gives you an opportunity to improve, to create a new system, to develop something that will make that not happen again, or at least come up with some type of consistency for that not happening again. But typically, it's about them. It's about where they're at in the process. And really, it's rarely, even though people might say it from time to time, I find it's rarely about finances. It's really, in my case, most of the time about the overwhelm of that person's life. And they see whatever it is you do as both the combination of not being important enough to make it a high enough priority and something that they need to do that's taking up time. And they've maybe just come across something that requires more time and energy. Maybe they had a crisis in their life. Now, I would love if when a crisis came up, the first thing people thought about was I need to go get checked. I need to manage the stress of this. I need to make sure I stay healthy. And of course, that's the most logical way. And therein lies the challenge, is we recognize how logical that is. Do you have systems and communication in place in advance of this? Because what I will say is by the time someone has made the decision, there's very little you can do at that point to change their mind. And so getting into a confrontation or, creating an upset, those things aren't going to make a positive improvement in this. And I've done that. I always share this story, and I'm not sure if I shared it on the podcast before, but it's almost horrifying to talk about. So I had what I would consider a good practice member. And in fact, she was probably the first practice member that I really shared the let's call it the chiropractic story, with this idea of subluxation, and that we check for subluxation, correct it, we're going to test you, and that you're better off not subluxated for the rest of your life because of all these amazing things that happen when you are subluxation free. And she was with me for years, probably 2 or 3 years. And then she dropped out of care. And I was perplexed. I couldn't get it. And I just didn't understand where this person was coming from. And so, I sent a message saying, basically, great, we'll close your file. And, of course, the inappropriate tagline in that email was, I'm concerned who's going to check you and correct your subluxations. And yes, I actually said that in the email. Who's going to check and correct your subluxations? And it wasn't coming from a great place. I was clearly angry and upset. And the logic of it is, yeah, who's going to check and correct your subluxations? And her message back was, not, don't you worry about it. I'll take care of it. And she wasn't open, obviously, to a dialogue at that point. It wasn't the appropriate thing to say. And I still think about that to this day. And so, it may not be you. It just may be them. It might be where they're at. And there's lots of procedures and communication strategies that will at least keep the doors open for that person. But I do think that there is a place to have them face the reality of their decision. So let's talk about some of the things you can actually do, given the fact that people are going to leave and that it's probably not you. So what are at least the components that you can manage to take out the one negative that is you? How do we make sure it's not you ever, and that it's always them and a decision that they're making based on where they happen to be at? Number one, and most importantly, is develop your own self-esteem, right? Is that goes back to the mantra of, I don't need your $50. And so developing your self-esteem to the point where you are strong in who you are and what you do. You don't take things like this personally. This person has the free will to choose whatever they want. And they can come and go in your practice if they choose to. Now, of course, it's your choice to accept them as well. So it's not a one-sided coin here. It's, you still have the opportunity to have an agreement with them if they can't meet those requirements. Nobody says you have to accept them into your practice. So building up your self-esteem and going through a lot of the things we've given you over and over and over again on these podcasts. And I'll put the Think by Design manual in here 2.0 as an opportunity for you to grab. It's a freebie for you. There's also now a 30-day Think by Design challenge, which is free, and it gives you a great chance to go through a video series to learn more about all the things you can be doing to develop your self-esteem. Number two is improving your communication, and this is really the extension of developing your self-esteem. So as your self-esteem improves and you are more able to have these strong, clear, authentic communications with your patients, you're going to see less and less people going inactive, partly because you'll accept less people who may have gone inactive, but you'll also create a far better agreement with people going forward. And so this is where it comes in, is especially in the agreements. And I think about, we just did a big team training over the end of last week, had a team in from a different province to spend a full day. We did a full team training, and a large part of our training, when we dug into their success surveillance system, when I dug into their systems of what they were doing and their procedures, a large part of why there was an abundance of inactives was simply because the agreements weren't strong enough. And as we started to get through that with the doctor, even he was clearly seeing how these agreements could be improved. And he shared with us many times how a big part of this problem, he recognized it was him. And it was his self-esteem issues and past challenges that had stopped him from having these conversations with people, even though his biggest fear was people leaving the practice. And so what happened was people were leaving the practice because he wasn't having the agreements, but he wasn't having the agreements because he was scared that people would leave the practice. And of course, that's a paradox, and that needs to be resolved. As you develop self-esteem, you realize, I need to have a very clear, authentic agreement with every single person in my practice. So just as an example, if someone is, moving through the day 2 process and we're following the blueprint that we laid out at Life by Design for Chiropractors, we're going to get to the point where I ask them a very clear question. Bill, is this important enough to you to spend the next few months beginning to correct this core problem with your spine and nervous system? And I ask it personally like that almost every single time, because it's a tried and true, very strong question in this sales process to get a very, very clear agreement. And as we go through that process, at that point, it's a yes or a no. And if it's a yes, I'm going to ask them, are you sure? I need to know 100% sure. In fact, I'll tell them, don't start this process, meaning corrective care, unless you plan on completing the process. It'll be a waste of your time. It'll be a waste of your money, and you're not going to get a great result, at least not the one that you're going to be happy with. And so making those types of agreements, they might feel uncomfortable at the beginning, but it only takes a few times for you to go through them to really, I think, enjoy actually having these conversations. I love having this conversation with people because I know in my mind I'm saving myself a lot of pain and a lot of emotional turmoil if I can just get this person to make this agreement now. Or in reverse, I'm okay if they say no. In fact, I would still prefer that if they're not going to complete their corrective care, they tell me now. And that way we can part ways and I can not have invested that energy and that time into this person, because that's a big thing for me is, sure, I still go through these emotions and maybe not at the same degree as I did 15 years ago. And I'm still irritated at least when someone drops out of care, partly because I've made an investment of time and energy into them. And while they don't owe me anything, I still feel like, man, put all that time and energy into this person and developing this person, developing their understanding, and they had amazing results both objectively and subjectively. I just don't get it. And that's something I'm fine with. As I said earlier on in the show, I'm fine with not getting it. I'm fine with being perplexed by the fact that somebody would make this decision, because those are the lessons that are making you better. Now, the opposite side of that, and this takes me back to the old football days, playing in the secondary. For those of you who follow football, for those of you who don't, I was chasing around receivers all day and playing college football, and sometimes you would get beat. Sometimes a person would make a catch on you. Sometimes they'd catch it for a touchdown. And one of the lessons you learn really quick in that position is you need to have a short memory, because the shorter your memory is, the faster you're going to be focused and attentive for the next play. And in this case, the next patient, the next visit, the next interaction. So you can't let these things linger. And this is where the final piece comes in. And this is where having a system, which is such a common thread through all of these podcasts, the system is the solution. And of course, the system is an extension of the higher values, of the purpose, of the vision, and it extends down into the day-to-day communication and the day-to-day systems. So have some type of system. For us, this is an exit protocol. So if someone wants to drop out of care, I'm not going to let them just peter away and never reach out, never contact them again. They're going to go through a series of steps. And of course, they're done in a way that is, not overly confrontational. It's not meant to make the person feel bad. It's meant to make the person face the reality that there's a problem here. You're going to stop getting checked and having this problem corrected. That means there's a result that's going to stop. And as long as you're okay with that, then that's the way it is. I mean, that's my role as a clinician. My role as a healthcare provider is to give clear information to people so they understand that the choices they make have an impact. And whatever the choice they make, at least I can sleep at bed at night. When I was struggling, it was because I felt like there was things I never said to people. There was opportunities I never took with these people. And that, man, they left my practice. Was there something I could have done better? And I would beat myself up over it. By having an exit protocol, you can really avoid this pattern, or at least mitigate or reduce this pattern from happening. So in our exit protocol, there's an examination. At the pre-examination, I'll have a conversation with them just about the fact that there is a consequence. There's this thing called a subluxation. And if they're recreating subluxations and no one is checking and making corrections, then the effects of the subluxation are going to affect their health. And there's going to be both short-term effects and long-term effects. And we get on the same page with that. In fact, I have them initial a document that is our discontinuation form that highlights that. And not to make them feel bad, just to notate, okay, yeah, I understand that. And I'll tell you, at first when I launched this, I was uncomfortable. And that was something I was trying to do, is find things that I thought would improve my practice that I was uncomfortable doing. And so I launched this, and I'll tell you, it wasn't as uncomfortable as I expected it to be. In fact, people who did drop out after going through this protocol and going through this conversation, they'd say, yeah, this is totally on me. I understand. And, I have to do it for the XYZ reasons, whatever their reasons were. But they understood that, okay, great, we're going to do an examination today. That'll give us some baseline data as to where you're at. So when you do return, not if you do return, when you do return, I'll have the baseline. We'll retest you again. And if it's more than 90 days, we'll go back through the full testing protocol. And in some cases, there's a new corrective care program that needs to be completed. So they understand that. Great, great. We shake hands, we hug, we have a great exit visit, if you'll call it that. And then they'll go ahead and have the test done, and away they go. And they go on our inactive list, and they might get a bunch of emails on a regular basis. I believe they do get fed into an exit survey. So if they do want to share more information about their experience that maybe they didn't feel comfortable telling me, the fact is I want to know. I want to know every single way I can make my practice better. But at the same time, I'm not going to allow these particular instances, the extremely rare, 5% of my practice or 10% of the practice that starts and then eventually drops out. I'm not going to let them affect the ability to deliver amazing care to the other 90 and 95% of my practice base. So I really hope you guys got a lot out of today's episode. I know even just going back through it and sharing it with you, I've gotten a lot out of it, and a reminder of why we do this. And it's a reminder of why we do what we do, and that we have to protect ourselves emotionally in providing great care for people. We can't get caught up in the people that are leaving. We need to have a system in place to get focused on the people who are there as much as we absolutely possibly can. But of course, leave the doors open for the other people to come back, but only based on a strong and solid agreement that's been made with them. So thank you so much for listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic.